Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pick and Mix podcast with Leadership Launchpads. And I am overjoyed to be joined by Dr. Jim Rogers, who has been a friend at distance for a long time and a friend through other acquaintances for a long time. And so now I have the joy of having some personal time. And I guess we have the joy of having some personal time with him today. Jim has his own consultancy company. He's an education advisor. He works with PGCE students. He's an executive coach. So lots of things that to learn from him today. And so I guess we'll start off with Jim. Tell us a bit about your current role and so what you do.
Hey Chris, it's really nice to be here, and it is something really indulgent, isn't it, about being able to have a chat with somebody like this. We can forget that this is a podcast; we can just have a chat. So that's exactly what I like. However, if I go off tangent, you just have to. I think we just said this. If I see you nodding off, then I know it's cue to shut up. So, so my current working sort of pattern is quite complex, and I quite enjoy it. Somebody called it portfolio working the other day, which sounded really posh, but I suppose I do a number of things. My substantive role is as principal education advisor to a group called Education Development Trust, a big international education charity, and through that we run early career framework, or whatever it's called now, and MBQs, and I'm a program director for the MBQ for executive leadership, which we've run now for the last 2 or 3 years. So that keeps me really busy, and I really enjoy the executive leadership development work that we do through that. We're quite creative in how we go about delivering that program. So that keeps me busy for part of the week. As you said, I run a consultancy, so I work with businesses and I work with schools and trusts. I'm really interested in learning across sectors, from elite sport to business leadership to education and public sector leadership, and particularly around things like organizational culture and team performance and that kind of thing. So, and through that work, I've then been invited to join a group, a practice with a group called Independent Economics, which is based in London, that aren't education based, but we provide services for big companies, multinational companies and NGOs around the world, again, around organizational culture and performance. So that's been really fascinating. This year, I've gone back to do a little bit of work at Exeter University, which is actually my old job, working with the trainee teachers there in the School of Education. I've absolutely loved it. I've been visiting them in schools, watching them teach, giving them feedback, kind of nurturing this group of secondary geography teachers, which I absolutely love. And then other bits and pieces alongside this. So as you said, a coach. So I'm coaching at the minute, I think 25 school leaders across the country, and working with several multi-academy trusts around supporting their central teams around school improvement and school improvement frameworks, and coaching them as well. I work with a colleague, Dr. Laura Kerslake. We created something called the Great Oracy Toolkit, which is based on an oracy program that I designed about 9 years ago. And we've delivered this now across schools across the country. And each year, I also take a group of school leaders out to Denmark, and we go and visit schools in Copenhagen. And I work with some friends out there called the Nordic Schools. So that's kind of busy.
That is a vast portfolio. I guess people listening will probably, that sounds all exciting, and I wish I could do that. Are there any drawbacks of portfolio work?
It's a really good question, Chris. So we might talk about this in a bit more detail later. Okay. When you work for yourself, first of all, you get really excited about that freedom and the creativity, which I absolutely love. For me, that's one of the best bits. So if I want to go and approach somebody and talk to them about their leadership approach and how they led Leeds Rhinos rugby league team, we'll talk about Stevie later, I can go and do that, which is great. But then you also have lots and lots of bosses, and you're trying to serve lots and lots of different people. And when you're trying to manage that alongside everything else, you have to just be really disciplined. It's like any other sort of system leadership role, I suppose. And also, of course, if you work for yourself, particularly at the minute, it it can be challenging, particularly in the public sector with funding. So, and I think it's the same with business leaders as well. So does it have some drawbacks? And I suppose it's just managing time, managing expectations. The temptation is to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
And then you can find yourself in a bit of a pickle. But then equally, if you don't say yes and then work gets a bit quiet, you start to panic and worry about it. So it's a constant fine dance,
That is an interesting thing for younger leaders, or emerging leaders is probably a better term, but for emerging leaders to reflect on, because it can be quite tempting, can't it, at the beginning to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's a double-edged sword, because often saying yes to something opens the door to something else, which is great. But potentially you need to have your own kind of well-being, time management, all that stuff in mind, as well as, I think, the idea that you physically, I suppose, if you were going to look at it theoretically, cannot give 100% to more than one thing. So alongside the kind of well-being issues, you physically will not be as good at 10 things as you will be at 5 things, even if your well-being is protected. So that's interesting. My other reflection during that was I might not be suitable for portfolio work, because I think because even at the grand age of 47, I still am quite low in terms of self-esteem and need for validation, and I'd probably overstretch myself. All right, well,
I think both those reflections are really interesting. We can talk about the leadership stuff, obviously, during the podcast. But I think one of the questions, one of the conversations I have quite often with people in new leadership roles, is why are you doing what you're doing? What does success look like?
Yeah.
And when we really sort of peel back the layers, often people are seeking validity, they're seeking affirmation from others, they're trying to prove themselves for whatever reason. And the risk then is, as you've just said, you want to be seen to be that person that has the answers and would do everything, go the extra mile. And if you get to our ripe old age, Chris, and I'm a little bit older than you, we've also hit the wall a few times, and it can be really, really hard. So I think one of the things I try and do with the coaching is to try and help people understand why they might want to say no to something, or be very careful in terms of prioritization. So
that's fascinating. Great. Right. Well, let's get stuck into the choices that you've made. And so for those that are new to the podcast, Jim's made some choices about some things he wants to talk about today, and they're in the form of fast friends questions, which are aimed to build connection, launch paths, which he's chosen from the book that resonated with him, and what we call ignition points. So events or experiences in his life that have had a big impact on him. So the first question that you chose was, for what in your life do you feel most grateful? So tell us a bit about that.
So what happens is you present us with a list of questions, and we sort of pick our way through them, and it's hard. It's quite hard to imagine talking about them all, but I thought this would be a nice one to start with. So I think I'm going to hesitate a little bit here. Understanding that where we are right now is really, really important. So what I'm trying to say is that we quite often get caught in the trap of wanting more, or trying to work our way up the career ladder, or have the next leadership challenge, or trying to prove ourselves, like we just discussed, and always kind of pushing forward. And actually, that, in a sense, comes from a deficit model of thinking about where we are right now isn't enough. Like, we want the bigger house, we want the bigger car, we want the better job. And I think one of the things I've learned over the years is actually taking stock of where you are right now. Try not to worry about the future too much, and just looking around. And if you've got your health, and we're not in a state of war, and we can get up and do something with a sense of purpose every day, we're incredibly lucky people. Incredibly lucky people. And I think that's come into really sharp focus recently with the war in Ukraine and what's happening in the Middle East. I think, we by virtue of the fact that we're British citizens, and we're living in this country at the minute. Although life is hard for a lot of people, we have that safety. We've got a welfare state. We've got things to be very, very grateful for. And it's very easy to fall into that trap of being critical of what's going on around us. But, this morning I've had all of my refuse collected. I've had my recycling collected, my food waste collected.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I've got one child driven off to work in one direction. We've dropped the other one off in a different direction. We're able to do that. So I think it's really important to be mindful of where we are right now. We should be. I am particularly very, very grateful. I feel very lucky to have what I have, and very, very emotive. I think about seeing other people in different parts of the world not able to have those things. So that's
interesting, isn't it? There's something around kind of having a wider perspective, or kind of understanding the stuff that's all around you. I suppose something for leaders, I suppose, to think about as well, because no doubt lots of people listening to this have got some very right in the front of their face challenges happening. Certainly when we get back to school, this is in the half term, but refaced with those kind of daily kind of ups and downs of school leadership. And I guess if you work outside of that, leadership is no different. That they have that kind of dynamism, and maybe there's something about taking some time proactively to recognise the little things that are going well, and to have that as a habit, I suppose, to keep you balanced around, wow, these are the challenges, but look at all this other good stuff that's happening.
Yeah, and it's very pertinent given the timing of this podcast. So we've got another half term into the summer holidays, and in the next half term, in my last coaching sessions of the academic year for the school leaders that I'm working with, I deliberately ask them to take stock. I give them a reflection wheel. They look at what they've done well, what they're happy with, what they could do less of, more of. Because if we don't have that conversation, nobody else will have that conversation with that leader. And being able to kind of take stock and reflect on those small things that you've just said. I mean, there are things that we take for granted about the people around us, the teams that we lead, the little achievements every day with students in school, or whatever it may be, that sometimes we're so caught with that thing that's right in front of our face that you've just described. We don't see those things. So I think that's a really important skill for a leader. Yeah,
that's interesting. I was just reflecting then, like sometimes we need somebody else to force us into that positive reflective state. And I had a contracting meeting with the senior leader a couple of weeks ago. And of course, you'll do the same, I'm sure, but that standard question of what do you know about yourself that would help me coach you better. And this senior leader said that they struggle to positively reflect on themselves or their role and all those things. They tend to lean into the negative all the time. And they, really helpfully said, I could do with some help locating those positive elements. And so that's great for me to know that, I need to force them into that reflective state. And when I catch them dipping into the negative, to try and stop that and counteract it, because, sometimes we can't get there ourselves, can we?
No, and I think that's the nature of being a social species. We are hardwired to kind of cohabitate and collaborate with others. Again, we might talk about this a bit later, because I think it's crucial for leaders to be open-minded in that way. But to have somebody outside of your setting, working independently, judgment-free, to be able to talk through stuff, I think is one of the most powerful things you can do to kind of support and nurture yourself or a colleague.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get stuck into your first kind of ignition point, and to get behind, the leader that is, Dr. Jim. But so you said the name you gave this was Stepping Into My Suit. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, it's not into my wetsuit to go for a surf, although
it's a shame.
I'd love it to be. Okay, so this relates to a very specific point in my career where I've been very lucky in my career. to have had and found lots of opportunities. So I haven't had a very traditional career at all. I taught in secondary schools. I had school leadership roles, then had an opportunity to work at Exeter and prove that I had some academic nous. If you knew what I was like at school, Chris, my A-level results, nobody ever thought I could do it. So that was a little period, or quite a long period actually. And then at the end of that stage of my career, so I'd managed to do a master's and a PhD. It was really hard. I found it really hard at the end because I was trying to balance that with a full-time job, small children, living in my office, doing my data analysis. It was intense. But I really wanted to use that learning from the university and the kind of the things that I learned around using data and evidence well. So the kind of the discipline of research, applying that in practice. And this is before, Education Endowment Foundation became a thing. It was probably right at the beginning of that kind of era that we're still in now. But also what I was beginning to learn around really effective professional development, working with adults. So andragogy, the theories of learning that we apply to adults. And I thought I was going to go into a school leadership role. In fact, I went for a deputy head interview in a big secondary school, and I didn't get the job because I was too nice, which said at the time, I was a bit hurt, but it made me reflect on what schools sometimes think that they want in terms of a leadership role. But I ended up leading an organisation called Plymouth Teaching School Alliance in Plymouth, obviously in Devon. And it was a very different sort of organisation. So it sat within a community interest company called Plymouth Learning Partnership. It served all 84 schools across the city. So we worked alongside the local authority and effectively were kind of funded by and serving all of the schools, regardless of whether they were free school, grammar school, secondary, primary, special. My job was to kind of be the glue in the city, to develop collaborative structures around school improvement, to provide support for school leaders. We just had a very difficult situation with a school leader post Ofsted that I sort of walked into at the time. So I was very aware that support's where the coaching has come from, and initial teacher training and other sort of CPD programs. And the stepping into the suit bit is a kind of acknowledgement, I think, that I stepped into my first system leadership role without realizing it was system leadership.
Right.
And one of the things I learned very quickly was that my job was to go out and build the relationships and build trust and understand and listen to school leaders' challenges and issues and priorities and make sense of that. And in order to do that, I had to put my suit on and play that role.
Yeah.
And I had an early meeting. It was a really interesting meeting for me when I met the secondary heads and the Secondary Heads Association. Some of those secondary heads have been in the city for a long time, very well respected. But I would say they definitely weren't collaborating at the time. We had full role in the city, so there was quite a lot of competition. And we were sat in a small meeting room and it was really hot and the windows were really high and there was no air. Majority male school leaders, and there's me, my first meeting with them.
Wow.
And nobody would take their jacket off. Everybody had their tie, done up tight.
Yeah.
I just remember
beads of sweat
weltering, and just understanding that this is what the game was. You had to play that role. So it was my first system leadership role. I learned everything about building those relationships, but then also within this was challenging back. So I wasn't doing everything that everybody asked me to do. We had a very well-funded CPD program that wasn't really having impact, and it was headline driven, data driven, but always behind the curve. So it was always kind of chasing the issues, and not having that impact. And part of that, I think, was the structures in which CPD was being delivered. So we did some really cool stuff. We set up some subject hubs that still operate today. We created the Plymouth Oracy program, which was about looking beyond those headlines and really drilling down into that relationship with deprivation, language, and learning. Did some cool stuff around reading across the city.
Yeah.
And it was one of the toughest things I've ever done, but I absolutely loved it.
I love
and that was stepping into my suit.
That sounds great. And what an interesting kind of almost metaphor, isn't it, about sort of stepping into your role and feeling comfortable in that role or comfortable in those clothes. And that's an interesting reflection for me, because I've been in the same organisation for 23 years, from kind of inception up to what it is now. And it's interesting for me because I've had to purposefully reinvent myself, or at least reflect on how I'm different with colleagues that I've almost grown up with, you know. And for lots of listeners, they might be in situations where they're now in levels of superiority above people who they were previously working under, maybe. And that's a tricky one, isn't it? To be able to mentally step into the suit and to recognize that you have a newfound authority or responsibility. Tricky one.
I think just a quick comment on that, Chris. I don't know how you've felt this, but one of the things I've recognised in similar roles where I've been a teacher and become a head of faculty, for example, or you then become a senior leader within the same organisation. And one of the things I've become aware of post those experiences is actually other people are looking at you in role, that they will very quickly forget where you came from, and they will expect Dr. Chris Baker to be whatever level of seniority. That's what they're looking for. The barrier is within yourself, because you still really see yourself in that sort of, we all still see ourselves as children sometimes. So you're kind of you're having to kind of redefine that. The flip side is when you're new. So this, for me, this was, although I taught in the city and I kind of understood the city, I was a fresh face in the city. And the flip side of that is you have to start completely from scratch. So if you mess up, so I remember, here are some of the mistakes I made. At one big meeting I went to, I'd ridden my motorbike into work and I'd forgotten my shoes. Right. I had to go to Primark to buy a pair of shoes to go to this meeting. So did I feel comfortable? Nope, they didn't fit. But I just had to make sure I presented myself. I missed my first CPD board meeting because I was talking to a head teacher in the city, and I thought that was the priority, and I didn't realise I needed to be at this board meeting. So when I got back to the office, all of my colleagues, my line managers, I got an absolute roasting, and you make those mistakes. But one of the things that I realised was that if you're very deliberate in how you plan your time to build those relationships, then that's the groundwork that you have to do. That's the legwork, and that's what helps create your identity when you're new in role, rather than just hiding in the room with the door shut, going through all the data and the spreadsheets and thinking you got all the answers.
That's a great takeaway. I think the idea that a lot of times our insecurities are personal perceptions rather than external realities, and maybe work on ourselves rather than worry about working on others. But again, we could carry on, couldn't we? So let's get stuck into your sort of first launchpad. And so for people that are new to the podcast, the idea here is that Jim's chosen 2 images from the Launchpads books, and effectively what I'll do is walk through my thinking that created it, and then we'll ask Jim to sort of say why it resonated with him. And so the first one that he chose was something that I titled kind of Seeing Past the Seductive. And this was a bit of a dig, I think, at myself, because I recognised that I'm guilty of this quite often. And so the tagline really here is this idea that it's not always, and probably if ever, the shiniest or the most likeable solution that's best. And so I started thinking about how we are potentially cognitively biased, or for all kinds of reasons, biased towards the things that potentially are, either they come very easily to us, as in maybe we understand them really easily, or somebody gives them to us, as in we haven't got to go and look for it, and super difficult if it comes from a credible source as well. We're sort of seduced, for want of a better word, by things that are popular. And that's just, I guess, a human nature thing. And of course, we're all, as Jim sort of alluded to at the beginning, in this sort of financial crisis is not too soft a word, I don't think. This situation where cost is a big thing, and often it's a big driver in what we choose. And so the Launchpad for me was about saying to leaders, just recognise that you might be making decisions based on those things, and maybe look a little bit past that into potentially the evidence base. So thinking about, as we would normally hopefully do, the strength of support for each of the choices that are kind of, available, to then thinking about kind of the contextual matching. I think that's something I've talked about on other podcast episodes, about not just dragging and dropping, or one guest called it lift and shift. We can't just pick something up from a different context and drop it in and expect it to work. So something around, okay, how does this fit with our kind of setting? And then you could sort of go into potentially resource alignment and opportunity cost, this idea that, are we able to do this in terms of time and finance and that sort of stuff? But also, what will we have to stop doing, or what are we likely to stop doing because we've started doing this? And so I started thinking about that really in terms of, pushing myself to look past the shiny stuff. But why did it resonate with you, Jim?
It's really interesting actually to hear how this particular kind of slide or Launchpad is the kind of the evolution of it. And I think we've probably come at it from a fairly similar perspective. You mentioned human nature. So I'm always interested in this, how we operate as species. We can collaborate with people at scale in a way that no other animal can do.
Yeah.
And I believe that we socially construct knowledge. Not everybody believes that, but I think that social learning is really important. And we are always looking for the easiest route. We're always looking for the shortcuts. And it doesn't matter whether we are talking about work, we're talking about life. We are trying to create as an easy environment around us as possible. I went to watch my daughter compete in 10 Tours the other day. And 10 Tours, for those people who don't know, is a huge event in the southwest west on Dartmoor, run by the Army, where a couple of thousand young people in teams have to be self-sufficient, no mobile phones. They're out walking across the moor, navigating and understanding challenge and hardship, teamwork and leadership. And they were given this really rousing talk. And I wish I had the guy's name here, but he was a senior member of the Army, leading the Dartmoor camp there and leading the other teams that were serving the kids. And he talked about how Dartmoor would not bend to their convenience.
Okay.
It's a harsh environment. They have to understand that just as they set off. And I stood there and I thought, that's what I'm seeing in education at the minute, is that we're trying to bend education to our convenience, I think, too often. We're trying to make it fit maybe how we're being measured or what external accountability framework is in place. And we're trying to make life as easy as possible, I think, for ourselves, not necessarily for those children. So there's something here around, as a species, I think we're drawn by the seduction of ease, of comfort, and definitely of the shiny stuff. We do like a shiny thing, okay?
Yeah.
So the thing that I've been working on for years now, with always with school leaders, always with teachers, is developing that critical engagement with the world around them.
Right.
So how do you ask questions of the research? How do you ask questions of the data? How do you ask questions of your context? How do you know? And then you can start building strategy, or you can start developing professional development or school improvement. But without that really important process in understanding the opportunities and the limitations of something, I mean, if you added up the thousands, millions of hours that we've put into stuff that could be shiny, but actually hasn't had any impact on what we do. So I think that's really, really important. And I think that sometimes the hard graft, the pain, the suffering, the failure is an important part of that process. And if we try and skip that and just go straight for the shiny, or we're doing it because that school's doing it up the road, or we're planting this crop because farmer Joe up the road is planting it, then we're not taking that kind of critical engagement. And I think it's really, really important. We've marketized, that's the right word. We have this kind of market economy in education at the minute, where there is a lot of, I've talked about it before, a lot of white noise, a lot of people shouting, a lot of people trying to design the latest easy fix. And I'm worried about that. I think that we need to be doing a better job of kind of critically engaging and understanding the challenges and then thinking about the solutions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things on my mind there. Well, the first one being, as a call to action, I suppose, for leaders listening to this, is that it should be a question they're asking themselves all the time, pre-decision making, around who's at the center of this decision. Is it customers, kids, whatever? If you ever find yourself answering that with you, then probably need to do a bit more thinking. And then the other reflection, which is zero filter, is potentially, not career, but leadership launchpad suicide, is that there's something about the launchpads that facilitates that seductiveness. I get a lot of people say, oh, I love an image. It's so, and I've openly said that, the name, the clues in the name, these are not it's not the full answer. I'm not trying to, to crystallize decades of research into one infographic, or create the ultimate infographic even. But I recognize, and I've tried to say to people that, as the name suggests, you're going to have to go a bit deeper. Don't look at my launchpad on psychological safety and then say that you understand psychological safety. But again, I hear that from lots of people about how they love something because the way it looks, or they love something because it reminds them of something, or they like it because it's simple to understand. And I think you're right. The challenge we should set to people is, well, maybe the important and the tough stuff shouldn't be easy to understand. And we have to lean into that, I suppose. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and this is full disclosure, Chris. When your book arrived in its little Amazon box a while ago, and I picked it up, I was like, it's another easy book. It's going to create shortcuts. There's a risk, I think, that we disempower a profession by bending it to our convenience, right? So when I first looked at it, I was thinking, Chris has asked me to go on a podcast. No. But then, actually, when I started picking through it, so there's two things that really struck me. First of all, is the way you've structured and framed it. So looking at kind of the personal and the strategic, that very first bit in terms of how you've ordered the different launch pads, that's the entry into your thinking as a leader. And I was looking at this thinking, well, what if I had this book and somebody I was coaching, new into a headship role, for example, also had a copy of the book? Could I use this as part of a coaching conversation? And it's 100% yes. So if I asked a colleague to say, pick 2 or 3 things that are really pertinent out from the book, let's use those as starting points for a conversation, I think it's got huge potential. If I was a leader with a team, I would potentially buy them a copy of the book and use this as a way of framing some developmental meetings. So yes, I think it comes with a health warning. If you just look at the infographics and you think, oh, there's a nice rocket, that's what I'm going to do this week, then you know, you're never going to get anywhere. But actually, if you sit down and think, right, well, what would it take to turn this into a, I don't know, a conversation piece with my senior leadership team,
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
a conversation with a coach, or how would I reflect over the summer on this to prepare for my new role?
And it's funny you said that. I had somebody recently who described that very situation where what they've done is they were talking about the fact that all of their leadership development at the moment is quite formal, as in they send people on courses, but because they can't afford to send everybody on a course, chit chat. And so they talked about this need for almost like a drip feeding of leadership development, or even just leadership reflection. And so they said, yeah, we bought a copy for each of our SLTs, and then we've just carved out 15 minutes in each SLT meeting, almost with a PD lens, and they rotate it around the group where each person picks a launchpad for that meeting.
Yeah.
And the first question then is, James, Susie, why did you pick this? And then that creates a conversation, which, so that's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's got a good place for it. But I think, coming back to that original piece, it's about how we use information.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I mentioned pre-podcast, really good friend of mine, Dr. Mark Rickinson, who runs a huge program. It's coming to the end of the funding period now, but it's been called the CURE program, QURE. It's the Quality Use of Research Evidence in Education. And they've worked with schools right across Australia. He's based at Monash University, and they've looked at. So what I've liked about it is they've done this before the system gets flooded with research evidence.
Sure.
So it's about kind of telling the stories and the narratives about how we use that research well.
Yeah.
Before the seductive, and I think that process, or that struggle of things working and not working, is a really important part of the journey. So
brilliant. Okay, well, again, that is super insightful. And for listeners, question yourself: are you being seduced by things? Do you need to look past the kind of seductive stuff? Well, let's get stuck into your second Fast Friends questions. This is about crystal balls. And so the question was, if you had a crystal ball that could tell you the truth about yourself or your life or the future, what would you want to know?
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting question because, again, the sense of wanting to know implies a certain level of kind of insecurity about where you are, So we want that assurance, and we want that certainty. So if I see a shooting star, I make a wish. My wish is always that my kids are going to be healthy and happy.
Nice.
And it has been since the day they were born. So there's that one simple, sort of parental desire to know that everything's going to be okay. But on a bigger scale, I think one of the things that I've had to learn, and I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail later on, but I've had to learn that knowing the answer and having that certainty, I don't need it. I think I need it. I think I want it. But actually, it's really important for me to wean myself off that certainty and just be confident that things are going to be okay. So I thought that I'd rather talk about the question itself than the actual thing that I want certainty about. There's a lot that's very uncertain for me at the minute, given some stuff that's going on. We talked about the impact of funding and the uncertainty that we have in the system, and that gives me genuine worry. And I have to work really, really hard to not obsess with that uncertainty and that worry, and want to have that certainty going forward, and just kind of understand that I can only influence what I can influence right now. So that's where my sort of questioning of the conversation comes from.
Well, I think that's a great reflection in itself. Yeah. And I like the phrase, having to wean yourself off wanting to know. Because again, I think that links probably back to our kind of, obsession is too strong a word, but our kind of affinity for simplicity. That kind of, we don't like being, cognitively confused, and we don't like that messiness of stuff. And if something or someone can help us close that off quickly, then we'll take that at every opportunity. And again, that's a dangerous thing to do. And it's interesting for me, again, just to slightly go into the Launchpad stuff again, about how it's the creation of the Launchpads that helped me get through the messiness. Because what typically happens is I'll come across a phrase or a term that I don't know, and then I'll have to go and read about it. But then I've got a lot of confusion because I'm reading so many disparate things and I have to bring it together. And so, yeah, that's nice. And I wonder whether people can reflect on what their affinity to knowing is and whether that's a helpful thing. I guess it's a continuum. Anyway, let's keep pushing on. So this next one is your second ignition point. And so this is what you've called winning from losing. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so this refers to a period of my professional life 6 years ago where I experienced redundancy from a role. Okay, so, and I think it's pertinent because a lot of people are facing something very similar at the minute in the system. People that have been long-serving members of staff in schools having to make very difficult decisions, trusts having to make very difficult decisions as well. So there's two parts from this. Okay, so the losing bit is I'm not going to kind of immerse myself in woe and self-pity.
Well,
right, so don't worry.
If it's helpful.
Yeah, I won't use this as a coaching session. But I'd fallen into the trap of the seductive. Okay, so I'd found myself in a director role for a large multi-academy trust. I was director of professional development. I had oversight of 2,000 members of staff, whether they were teaching, non-teaching, from the CEO, site staff, everybody's professional development needs. I had a particular focus on quality of teaching and learning. We had a skit, so we had initial teacher training. We were introducing apprenticeships. We were doing some really cool work around professional learning networks across the trust. But the seductive for me was probably for the first time in my career, I felt like I had a sense of direction in terms of what I wanted to do. I was a director, I wanted to be a regional director, and then I wanted to be a CEO. And completely out of the blue, so I was living away from home for 2 years. I'd made that commitment. I'd found schools for the kids. Everybody was going to reluctantly leave Cornwall so that I could follow my career, right? And then that was taken away from me. So a decision was made. I didn't know. I had no sense of it, no warning. I had just had a meeting. It was this time of year with HR, completely out of the blue. You're going to lose your job this summer.
Wow. And
I learned some really tough lessons over the next few months. It was really hard for me. And there was a couple of things I learned. So one was that I realized that my job was my identity at the time, that I was the director of professional development. I had a profile, I had a reputation, and I'd fallen into the trap of thinking that that's who I was.
Right.
So when you lose that, you lose a sense of identity, you lose a sense of purpose. And at the time, I've become really interested in this. Okay, so I'm going to just take a really quick tangent.
Okay.
I was asked a little while ago if I'd help support the recovery of a motorcycle racer who'd injured himself badly in Northwest 200, a road racing event in Ireland. And this guy was really struggling with his recovery, and he just wanted to know some stuff. Okay, he wanted that crystal ball. And I had to make it really clear that I wasn't the person this guy needed to see. Yeah. I'm not a medical practitioner or a psychologist. But I did do a little bit of research myself around this. And one of the really interesting things I found was that a sense of agency in the healing process can quicken the healing, right? So if you are injured or you're ill or you've had an operation, if you don't feel that you can own that recovery, it takes a lot longer to recover. And so linking it back to this, one of the things I realized was that process of redundancy took away a sense of agency.
Right.
And that agency was linked to a sense of purpose and a sense of identity. So I'm sharing it, I think, because other people I know will be feeling the same at the minute.
Yeah, of course.
And it's tricky. So one of the things, again, I had to understand in myself was that I was not that person. That was me in a role, but I had many other hats and many other identities.
Yeah.
And the winning bit was a process at the time where I set up my business. I learned about business leadership. I learned about financial management, tax compliance, marketing.
Yeah.
I realized that I could do stuff and I didn't have to do it through another organization. I could do it myself. It was just before the pandemic, so I then had another tough lesson to learn because I didn't qualify for any financial support. So suddenly, I had to get myself through that period, but we managed to do it. And so I think that my personal growth, and how old would I have been? I would have been 47, I think. I'm just trying to think, around about 47, 48. When you're in your 40s, I think you're at your prime. Or I thought at the time was at my prime, was at that stage where I felt like I could do anything.
Yeah.
And I lost it. And then what I've learned since is that was just a really important learning process for myself, and that I could do other things and I didn't have to be beholden to a particular kind of pathway or career. No. My identity wasn't completely caught up in it. So, yeah, that's winning from losing, Yeah,
that's really interesting. That idea of how closely tied is your self-worth and self-esteem and all those things to your role, and where would you be? And it's interesting for me to reflect on that as well, is where would I be if I wasn't my job? What else is there about me and stuff like that? I was just looking to see how old this version of 7 Habits was the other day, because I think this is the original. Well, I've had about 5 since, but I found this one. It sounds like a Hollywood movie, but it's generally true. I found it in Bolivia, in like a book swap in like the Amazon jungle. Like, it sounds ridiculous. And I remember writing some stuff in the back. And anyway, that's what I was looking at. But it reminds me of Covey's, I can't remember which habit it is now, but he talks about what you attach yourself to, like centers. I think it's, are you family centered, spouse centered, financially centered? And I think he makes the point that any over reliance on those things is not particularly helpful, because if you attach yourself to something dynamic, then you yourself will be dynamic, and that finding your self-worth from stable internal things is probably a safer place to go.
Yeah, I think so. I do a lot of work around resilience, okay, right. And I think that this is attached to that in some way. That and one of my really sort of cheesy metaphors is that we often think resilience is about that big, tough, strong building, the brick wall, the impenetrable armor that we have around ourselves, and actually resilience is the tree that bends in the wind. That's the metaphor that I use. And I think that you're right. If we work in dynamic environments, then we need to be dynamic. We have to bend, and that things won't always be perfect all the time. We won't always know the outcome, but we can ebb and flow. Talking to a guy yesterday who was really, really anxious. He ran a big tree surgery company. And he was anxious because he had some HR issue he had to deal with. But he also said to me, I'm caught in a bit of a trap here. My lifestyle costs me X amount of money each month.
Right.
I've got this big team, they're out working, but I'm not happy. I'm not enjoying it, Okay. And I didn't talk to him for long enough, but I was interested in how we sometimes corner ourselves into a kind of an expectation in life. And actually then we're beholden to it, we're committed to it. And freeing yourself from that is a very cathartic experience, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is good. Okay. Well, let's crack on to the second of your launch pads, because I think I was really looking forward to this one when I saw that you chose it, because I think from a personal point of view, I think this might be something that is less well served in our current leadership development offer. I think we tend to lean a lot into leadership as a process and teaching people how to be better at the process. And we sometimes, maybe because it's hard, we'll have a look at that in a minute, shy away from this idea of soft skills. And so, yeah, the thing that came to mind, first of all, was this idea that, the skills, often the skills most integral to effective leadership performance are potentially the most difficult to acquire. Certainly when I speak to leaders I'm coaching, or people that are, I'm coaching below leaders, they talk about the interpersonal aspects of their job. And certainly when I ask people to describe amazing leaders they've worked for, they very, very often describe some sort of interpersonal skill. And so I was just kicking this around as an idea about, first of all, what are we talking about when we're talking about these soft skills? And of course, you'll find a million lists and you'll find a million different things, and you'll find lots of people who agree with this in that they're not soft and they shouldn't be called soft. And that's kind of the point I guess I'm making. But common ones are things like empathy, patience, and if you're watching this, you can read them themselves. But adaptability, communication, time management, and I would imagine they're probably on a continuum of some sort. But my biggest reflection, I think, when I was making this was this idea that so why are they so difficult to develop? And the first thing I thought about was, they're the building blocks of our personality. So therefore, they've taken a long, long time to develop or not develop. And so that's really tricky because they're almost, core to our being. But if we think about leadership as a person thing, it's all about relationships. It's all about getting other people to do stuff, I guess. Then effectively, we need to lean into these. And then the other thing I thought about, was this idea of how tricky they are to move. I'm lucky in that I haven't had to say this explicitly to a coachee yet, but I've managed to guide people to this reflection of them saying, "Oh, it's me, isn't it? I'm the problem," and that it's really awkward for them, because they've done all the courses, they've got their doctorate or whatever qualifications they've got, and yet they're still not being as effective as they could do. And a lot of times, it comes up in coaching because they're not conscious of their lack of empathy. Or I had a hilarious one, which I've used a few times now in various conversations, of somebody, a coachee, presenting some feedback from someone else that they were overly aggressive when they speak, but then they went on to then be really aggressive in there. And so they were, "I don't think I'm aggressive. Do you think And I was like, right, wow. Okay. And I just kind of mirrored it back to them and we got to a good place. But yeah, a lot of times it can be unconscious, or maybe even kind of, because of our upbringing or even culture. Anyway, what's your reflection on soft skills?
Yeah, it's really interesting to listen to that. And I think self-awareness is at the heart of this, actually. So being aware of how you're perceived by others and how you come across to others at all times, when you're at your best, but also when you're at your worst, I think is really important. I have a bit of a problem with the soft bit, because
Exactly.
we talk about the soft and the fluffy as a bit of like, the wishy-washy. Yeah, it's nice to do, but we don't really need that, And actually, I think this is absolutely at the heart of every high-performing team, every effective leader. It's this kind of repertoire of skills that you can. You've used the term lean on a couple of times, but it's that being able to kind of select and use at the appropriate time. So there's a couple of things to think about here. I think that when we talk about organizational culture, we're actually talking about behaviors. We're talking about how we live and breathe, whatever values and kind of ethics we have as an organization, whether you're a business or a sports team or a school. And so the behaviors are linked to the relationships that we build and how we behave within that sort of network of relationships, how you are as a leader, how you are being led, how you are as a colleague supporting others, as well as all of the other behaviors that we have to deploy kind of outside of work. And what's the alternative? I think about this quite often now. We're exploring the opportunities of artificial intelligence. We're exploring the use of technology. So what's the point of us?
Yeah.
Where's our place in this? We have to demonstrate that actually we can add something that technology can't add to a system. And for me, if it's just about operational stuff, if it's just about transactional stuff, then we get a machine to do that.
Yeah, we're going to fail every time, aren't we?
Yeah. What we're good at is this. It's having a conversation. It's learning about each other. It's reading others' body language. It's thinking about what to say, what to not say, how to support, how to challenge. They're the human skills that we've developed as a species, again, that we kind of mentioned earlier on. And every time you listen to somebody who's achieved some sort of success, they'll talk about the relational.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's a football team, F1 team, bank, school, it's about relationships. So you talked about it being kind of linked to personality, and I've got a bit of a weird theory on this as well. If we just talk about schools, okay, when we recruit trainee teachers, we've got a very old-fashioned traditional recruitment process. They write an application, we interview them, if we like them, they say the right things, we give them a place in a teacher training course. And we tend, I think, that unconscious bias is to give people a place if they've got a good personality. We're trying to imagine them in a classroom. Can they hold the attention of the students? Are they going to engage them? Have they got that subject knowledge, but can they apply that in a context? We want to know there's something about them.
Yeah.
And that pattern goes all the way through. That's how we employ teachers, and so we've created an industry or a kind of vocation that's built on personality.
Right.
But we don't do a lot to nurture those personalities or shape them or help people reflect on their personalities. And I think what we get is sometimes too far at one end of the scale, is that people find themselves in a leadership role, maybe because they've got a strong personality, but actually they haven't had an opportunity to develop those other kind of wider, really important skills as a leader, including all of the skills that you've got here, from empathy, patience, creativity, work ethic, critically engaging with data, developing strategy, implementing change at scale. All of those skills we're doing very little to help kind of nurture. So to me, it comes back to, what's the purpose of us in the system? How can we nurture and shape and develop and support that? And then how can we then use that in terms of leading teams to do the same within teams?
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from me.
I think
it's really important.
That's super interesting. And I mean, again, the call to action for leaders, themselves or thinking about their teams is, what are the strengths or the levels of strength within what we would, not like to, but do call soft skills, and whether or not, there needs to be more of an effort in developing them. And I would imagine, we seem to be on the same page about awareness being the first step in that. And of course, the people will need to do further reading and further research in how to develop them. All right. Well, we're close to the end, sadly, but we've got one more question, which Jim has chosen. And that is a bit of a personal one, in that it's what personal quality do you feel you need to develop the most? Tell us about that.
So this probably links to everything that we've talked about today, from winning from losing to stepping into my suit to all of the kind of transition points in my career. The crystal ball, or the crystal balls as you call them. I don't have crystal balls. And being grateful. Okay, so the bit that holds me back as a person always is worry. I worry about stuff.
Right.
I worry about what's going to happen in the future. So all of the positive things I've said in this podcast, it comes from that deficit mindset that I need to do better. If you watch I think there's a new Mission Impossible film coming on, and the last one's on telly at the minute. And one of the opening scenes, I think it's Tom Cruise, says, "We are the sum of the choices that we've made." I think about this all of the time, not always in a positive way. Okay, so I can be very hard on myself, and I can worry about being in situations that I've created through the choices that I've made. I love the work that I do, the portfolio work that I do, but it comes with significant risk. I'm a father. I've got a kid at university. We are the sum of the choices that we make, but sometimes those choices are driven by factors that we can't control. And that's what I've got to remember sometimes, is that we don't always have the luxury of the decision. So the quality that I'd like to kind of develop in myself, and it's ironic, but it's something that I talk about a lot with coaches, is that
it always is.
It always is. You have to invite that inner coach in to talk sometimes, because it's easy to let your chimp bounce up and down and moan in his face. And I've got to manage that chimp like everybody else. I've got to invite that inner coach in to coach me through difficult periods. And one of the things is, how would I live if I had no fear?
Yeah,
if I didn't worry about stuff, if I could just let go of all of that and just know that right now things are okay. That's probably the most personal public thing I've ever said, but that's what I've got to work on.
Yeah, well, and people will appreciate the kind of level of vulnerability, and they will resonate, I'm sure, with that. And I mean, this might have already been in the answer, but to make it more clear to people, have you developed coping mechanisms over time to help with the level of worry that you have?
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's I imagine myself coaching myself. I imagine a conversation that I would have if I was coaching somebody else in the same situation. I do that. I walk. So I do a lot of my thinking and processing whilst I move, and learning about things like the polyvagal theory and how rhythm and motion help us kind of calm the noise. So that movement is important to me. I like to do it when I'm swimming, but sometimes I like to write an idea down, and I can't do that when I'm swimming.
It's a bit tricky, that.
I've forgotten it by the time I get out of the water. They're probably the two things. And one of the things that I really like to do with people that I'm coaching, if I can, is to go for a walk with them and not coach. If I don't have to coach online, is to get them out of an office and go for a walk. So those are the two things that help the most for me.
Love that. Amazing. Well, again, give us a bit of a heads up. How can people connect with you? How can they work with you? All that sort of stuff.
I'm not very good at this bit. I should have come prepared. So I'm on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. Get in touch with me through there. Do have a website. I think
and I'll put all the links in there.
So website, and also the Great Oracy Toolkit's getting a lot of interest at the minute. We've had our first inquiry from overseas in Hungary, which could be exciting. So if you're interested in the Oracy stuff that we do, then find the Great Oracy Toolkit online as well. So probably LinkedIn or through one of the two websites would be great.
Amazing. Well, the last thing for me, of course, is thanks to Jim. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you like the Launchpad stuff, then grab the book. There's going to be a website in a couple of weeks, which will be interesting. And and I'll see you at the next one.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris.